Hi, I'm Rob Borse from the Dallas Fire and Rescue Department. As part of the EMS Council, I'm here today to discuss with you the three different options we're looking at as we look forward to the new EMS response models. It should come as no surprise to anyone that our response volume has steadily increased for the last 30 to 40 years. In fact, as this graph shows, since 1972, call volume has risen steadily at a pace of around 4 to 6% every year to current day. Last year alone, there were over 190,000 EMS calls in the city of Dallas. Our response time has also increased to over 6 minutes now for all rescues. The linchpin to any change is priority dispatch. Dallas Fire Rescue just recently acquired priority dispatch, and that is a system used to dispatch appropriate assistance to medical emergencies by using systematic questions and providing pre-arrival instructions to 911 callers. Now, when we assess the need for change in our system, we must first measure how our system is currently doing. We do that by measuring our rescue's unit hours of utilization, or UHU. That's simply a measure of productivity. Compares the available resource with actual time utilized for patient treatment and transport. Generally, it is considered optimal for UHU numbers to be between 45 and 55%. Anything lower than that, and you're not using your resources wisely. Anything above that, and your system is taxed above optimum levels, and you're simply not meeting the demands of the community. When you look at our numbers for last year, we are well above the 55% level. In fact, as you look at our busiest ambulances, we're well over 70 to 75% of UHU numbers. You have to get all the way down to our slowest ambulances in the city before you get below that 45% level. That's simply unacceptable for our system, for our paramedics, and for our civilians. Simply put, our system is overtaxed, overworked, and ineffective. When you compare Dallas to other cities of similar sizes, we're about 1.2 million civilians. We run about 190,000 calls. We have 40 frontline rescues, and until very recently, we had 3 peak demand rescues. Recently, we increased that number to 7. When you look at other cities like Phoenix and San Antonio, we're very similar in population and unit numbers, but we're way above them in call volume. With the addition of the peak demands, we've already seen a positive effect on our UHU numbers. EMS calls for service have continued to increase, and our EMS crews have remained relatively the same. Current workload has been loaded disproportionately on the shoulders of frontline paramedics that must handle most EMS calls, regardless of the nature, ALS or BLS. To that end, and to fix that situation, the EMS Council was tasked with conducting a nationwide coast-to-coast search for different models to see what worked in other systems and what didn't work, and try to come up with some options that will work in Dallas. We've narrowed it down to 3 options. Option 1 is a BLS-ALS model. Option 2 is an ALS-only model, but where fire and EMS are separated. Option 3 is very similar to our current model, but with the addition of additional units and some other wrinkles that we'll get into in a couple of minutes. All 3 options have the ability to utilize RRU, or Rapid Response Units, or squads, to respond to select first responder calls. So first, let's take a look at option 1. As I said, this is an ALS and BLS transport capable model. It retains the traditional 24-48 work schedule, and firefighters would continue to rotate between fire apparatus and rescues. All paramedics would continue to be firefighters. The BLS component for BLS transports would be provided with personnel with 1 to 3 years of service. We would add those light response units, or RRUs, to all double company houses or wherever possible. Option 1 has some advantages. As mentioned, it would include both BLS and ALS transport capability. It would allow RRUs and first responders to take low acuity calls. It would place our newer members in a BLS rotation quicker than our current configuration does. It would reduce the burden on our senior members to all be paramedics on rescues. And it would give a light at the end of the tunnel by allowing senior firefighters off the rescues and also when promoting to driver. More advantages include it would prevent people from promoting to officer just to get off the rescue. the run volume would be more evenly distributed among our available resources. It would still allow the rotation amongst fire and EMS. Therefore, everyone maintains their skills. It also would lower the number of frontline paramedics to around 300, which would allow more effective oversight by medical direction. This plan would not be expensive or complicated to implement. It improves the EMS span of control, and it redistributes workload to BLS and RR units from ALS units. Option 1, though, has some anticipated disadvantages. It doesn't allow any extra time off for those still on the rescue. It still forces everyone who is hired by the Dallas Fire and Rescue Department to eventually become a paramedic. It prevents any double stacking full-time rescues or ambulances with the ALS-BLS capability. It also means that when you drop your paramedic certification, you would not be out of EMS. You might still ride a BLS unit. Moving on to option 2. Option 2 splits fire and EMS, where EMS would move to a 24 on, 72 off work schedule, and fire would remain 24/48. This would be a split of these departments, and when you move to EMS, you turn in your fire gear. You promote into EMS as a driver and only ride the rescue. If you come to work, you're on an ambulance. This would allow for a choice of members to become a paramedic. If you just simply wanted to be hired and remain a firefighter for the rest of your career and ride the back of an engine or truck, you would be able to do so. This would also allow for RRUs to be added to this model. There are some obvious advantages to this model. There would be 3 days off instead of 2 for paramedics to recover in between shifts. There would be less fatigue and less burnout with lower patient complaints and improved quality of care. You would work less total shifts per year as an EMS provider in this model. It would lower the number of frontline paramedics riding frontline rescues down to around 400, which would allow for more effective EMS oversight. This model would also provide paramedics a light at the end of the tunnel for when they could be done riding a rescue. Essentially, this would make becoming a paramedic a promotion. And what we've seen in other systems is this system improves morale. There's a better span of control for EMS to supervise and train paramedics. Also, the EMS department would be better able and better equipped to implement changes since they're in their own bureau. It also creates more incentives for those riding the rescues that make the majority of our calls. There would be better continuity for those riding fire apparatus with same members each shift. Because you wouldn't be rotating from the fire apparatus to an EMS apparatus, you would have essentially the same crew every shift. It would also stop the practice of promoting to officer simply to get off the rescue. It would distribute low acuity calls to other resources, such as RRUs or fire apparatus, to help share the workload. Like with option 1, option 2 also has some anticipated disadvantages. Every shift you work is on a rescue. The BLS transport capability is limited, and therefore the transport workload may not be redistributed from ALS crews. It may remain solely with those ALS units. You would lose experience from riding a fire apparatus since you would only be on ambulances every shift. This would create experience concerns when promoting back into fire ops as a lieutenant. You must retrain medics once they promote or transfer out of EMS to become more familiar with the fire apparatus and fire operations. This is also a very costly personnel model to implement and maintain. And finally, moving on to option 3. Option 3 is basically our current model with just additional units added into our fleet. Paramedics would still rotate between fire apparatus and rescues. However, in this new model, rescues would only be staffed by firefighters. Once you promote to driver, you are out of the rotation. Additional units for this model have already been requested, and in fact, we've already seen the impact of those additional units in the form of the peak demands that we've recently added. We could also add light response units, or RRUs, to all double company or other houses where there is room. The advantages of option 3 is that it is the simplest model to implement. It still maintains the cross-training of firefighter and paramedics. It would provide a very clear and short light at the end of the tunnel to all EMS personnel by removing drivers from the rescue rotation. Simply put, if you were a private who rides the ambulance, once the drivers are removed, you would know immediately what your number was to get out of the EMS system. This model would also maintain our current and in fact improve ALS response time standards by utilizing RRUs and engines as ALS response units. It would provide greater opportunity for drivers to take ownership of their assigned units and gain experience and training for later promotion to officer. Morale would improve by lightening the load on individual rescues and by providing the light at the end of the tunnel for your EMS tenure. Disadvantages to option 3 would include removing experienced drivers from the EMS rotation. It also does not redistribute the workload for transports. It would still remain on ALS units. The goals for these systems when we implement them is we want to decrease response times, decrease UHU numbers, increase availability of units to respond, and continue to deliver timely response and provide the highest level of care to the citizens and visitors to the City of Dallas. As we move forward to choosing one of these models to proceed, remember that our system goals for implementation include decreasing response times, decreasing UHU numbers, increasing the availability of units to respond, and to deliver timely response to provide the highest level of care to the citizens and visitors of Dallas. In closing, please use the following tables to compare and contrast the available models as we proceed. These list various features of each model and how it will affect personnel in our EMS and fire fleets. This also includes the perceived breakdown of workload as our call volume continues to increase from year to year. Thanks for watching.